Bryan Olsheski, how are you doing?
Doing great, Sean. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing all right. Before we got started, we were talking about bedtime routines for
Oh,
kids,
yes. Yes. You see the
and
bags under my eyes?
you can probably see the bags under my eyes too. Um, Although I don't have as many kids as you do, um, uh, but one thing about you uh, that is substantially different from when we met, and it's the same vice versa, is now we're dads,
Yeah.
and that kind of has an impact on you know how we do what it is that we do. You know, you're such a good dad. I see. I mean, it's the regular conversation every time we play together.
Yeah.
Is how's the family doing? How are the kids? And you always have something. You always have a little wrinkle that you're that you're discussing, and I
Yeah.
always have a little bit of something that's the yeah, this is the new development right here.
Yeah, right. You and I have very similar stories right now, right? We are just talking about bedtime a moment ago, right? Yeah.
um, so Bryan, so we met.
Right when you
It
came to town,
seemed it yeah
2007.
it, no, it seems like it was more like '04 or '05
Okay.
because I remember vividly that first gig that we had together was two saxophones and bass and drums, and
Right
it
on
was
Main
at
Street there, downtown somewhere, or
yeah, I think it was being called the Brownstone.
the Brownstone. Yeah.
That's right.
That's right.
And so yeah, we played a date there, and but I heard you before then. I heard you, and then folks were talking about you too, and I was like, hey, I need to find this cat, figure out what's happening. And we played that gig, and we just became really close friends, just like
Exactly.
instantaneously. It was just,
Yeah.
and through transitions that we both had in our lives, personal lives and professional lives and stuff, we stayed good friends. One of the things that we have in common, which is another regular topic, is the weight training, right? And now you actually have done something that I haven't actually been able to do yet. You actually competed in some bodybuilding competitions when you were
I did. Yes,
younger.
I did. Yep. Well, um, I was always a very thin person, and I was always kind of self-conscious about that. I know you were kind of self-conscious about that too. I've seen pictures of you when you were,
I was pretty skinny.
young, and you were a thin guy, naturally a thin guy like myself. We had talked about this in the past, but um, I just can remember going home to my mother and saying, Mom, I want a Joe Weider weight bench for my birthday, you know, and I had been called skinny and all this stuff one too many times. And I got the weight bench. Long story short, I worked out. I got fairly big. I probably put on 30 pounds of muscle, maybe in about 2 years. And um, when I think it was 19, I started entering bodybuilding competitions for whatever reason. I don't know why I did that, but I thought it was a good idea at the time. I should have been practicing, but I decided to do that, and I actually entered the World Gym Teen Competition uh, in Columbus in 1989, and I got third or fourth place in that, something to that effect. But us tall guys, it's kind of difficult for us to put on weight, especially me. And it was always such a struggle, and it really wasn't where my head was, and I decided to put that in the back burner. You know, taking it that seriously, anyways. I mean, I've always been into exercise, and that's always been a part of my life. I always want to feel good, and I do feel good working out and exercising. And now that I'm a little older, my exercising is taking a little bit of a different turn. I don't do as much heavy weight that I used to.
Right.
A bit more cardiovascular and things. And
So I'm gonna jump right in here, right here, because I'm a fitness advocate, and I know that you are also.
hmm
Um, and with my students, it's a regular thing that we discuss. You
yeah,
know, they know that I'm working out all the time. Um, I remember one time, for one semester, I had a running competition, and I had an ab wheel in my office. And the competition was, if you can do more than I can do, then you got a free lunch.
not an A.
Oh, right, right. Yeah, an A for abs. Um, I hope I didn't make you joke there. Um, but yeah. Uh, so I'm an advocate, and I started when I was young working out, um,
Yeah,
and my dad had a particular idea of he wanted me to have this kind of expectation to be doing something physical and
yeah,
moving around, calisthenics,
yeah.
and until I was 14, 13, 14 when I started training with weights, and that was all me and my buddy um, Anthony Woodcock, and we were all like super influenced by um,
Arnold.
Lee Haney and Arnold Schwarzenegger. So those are the guys, right?
Sure.
So that was like, um, and was some part of it was about impressing girls, of course. That's all right.
No, never. That's all I did it for, man.
But you have a huge sound. That's one of the things that I noticed about you instantly. Um, and I happen to believe that the potential to produce uh, such a big sound and have the endurance to maintain that sound over an entire gig, um, you have to be in shape to do that.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
you do.
can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, well, first of all, um, the very first thing that I do with my students before we start our lesson, we play long tones together. Okay. Um, uh, I believe that long tones are probably the most important, one of the most important aspects of practicing a woodwind instrument, because it. And I'm sure you know this, Sean. It connects you with your instrument in a way that you can't really find in other aspects of your practicing.
Mm.
I mean, you're dealing with one very specific thing. I mean, very specific. It's one note, and you're holding it out for a long period of time. And if you can get your mind into that note, and if you can get your thinking and your focus and discipline into that note, um, then y- there will be benefits to that. And so I'll do this kind of a short and a very easy version with my students. I don't do the full long tone, not like 20 seconds per note. We'll do like maybe 5 or 10 seconds per note, and then go up chromatically. But I always advocate a very full sound. Um, if my students are having issues with getting a full sound, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about where the sound's coming from, the diaphragm, the muscles, how the breathing aspect comes into play. But ultimately, if a person can hear the sound in their mind, um, that's step number one. You know, if they can hear the sound that they want to emulate, that they want to produce, to come out of their instrument, they can hear that. That's step number one, because I mean, what are you going to do if you don't have a reference, anything to
Yeah.
use? Um, so if a student is having troubles, with something regarding sound, uh, we'll listen to saxophones. We'll listen to saxophone players. Um, we'll listen to a lot of the people that I was really influenced by, and probably the first saxophone sound that I heard in my mind was my dad. You know, um, I know your father is a saxophone player.
Yeah.
Be influenced by your father, but my dad was way into Coltrane, and I am really into Coltrane and many other players of that kind of ilk, if you will. Um, so that's where my head is coming from. Whenever I sit down and I go to the saxophone, I mean that sound is in my mind. That's what I want to hear. That kind of thing. But yeah,
Yeah. Okay. You were talking about the musculature involved in pressing the air out of the lungs,
yeah,
and uh,
right,
one thing that uh, one thing that may not be intuitively obvious is that the abdominals are actually attached to the diaphragm.
yeah, between the
Um,
stomach and the diaphragm, yeah,
and so training, uh,
chest, yeah,
you know, at, abdominals, um, because one way that I present this is, you know, your abdominals are a non-hinged muscle group. So when you make that crunching motion,
mm,
you're working. You got some lower back involved. You've got hip flexors. You've got abdominal muscles, but then you also have the diaphragm.
right,
And having a certain amount of muscle strength. I mean, the way I teach in long tones is, you're tightening your stomach, you're pushing from your stomach, you're taking in as much air as possible, you're trying to expand your lung capacity. Um, Playing a horn is cardiovascular and physical.
yes.
I mean, it's athletic. It meets the definition of athleticism. I mean,
Yes, it does, and and especially it be it has different parameters too. As you know, according to the setup that you're using. You know,
no,
I mean, when I first got into tenor in college, man, I was nuts. I was using like a 10 star metal mouthpiece and like number four Rico Royal reeds, and I mean,
somehow I'm not surprised by that.
well, it was just ridiculous. I felt like there was a certain sound that I wanted. It was
Yeah, yeah,
very
yeah,
woody, a very woody, somewhat airy sound, but with a bright, resonant quality to it. And I
right.
felt like I couldn't really achieve that any other way. But that was just I was naive. I didn't know any better. But I don't know. It's like when I think about that, how a batter like in the dugout before they go to bat, they'll have like the donut on the bat,
Yeah,
the weights on the bat, and they're just swinging that bat.
yeah,
It's really heavy. It's just really heavy, and then they take those donuts off that bat, and when they get up to swing, that bat's really light.
mm,
You know, sometimes I wonder if that earlier part of me that was using those really strong reeds has any effect on how I'm approaching the horn today. Um, but yeah, I hear what you're saying about
yeah. That
you know,
that that and all the training, right?
yeah,
Just the kind of. I mean, part of what happens when you weight train is you actually uh, increasing bone density.
right,
So
right,
yeah, so all of that stuff I think is it's sort of all baked in the cake, right?
exactly. And I think part of it too, Sean, is people that exercise and really put their body through a rigorous strains and workouts. Um, they're acclimated to pushing. So,
Right.
if I'm playing really hard on a gig or something, I'm not afraid to really try to try to go for it.
Right. Well, and in addition to being acclimated to pushing, also acclimated to, and this is also not intuitively obvious, relaxing completely.
Mm,
You know, um,
I've been
you
doing that
know,
a lot lately.
but like those exercises when they'll tell you, okay, now, you want to hyperextend when you get all the way to the end of the motion, to where you're completely and totally the muscles totally not engaged, and then pull,
And
all of
release.
that kind of stuff. I
Yeah.
I feel like because of all the weight training, um, I'm more aware of when I'm tense, like when I have tension,
Yeah.
especially in my
Oh
shoulders.
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I truly feel like I'm more in tune with my body. Um, you know, uh, I have to stretch before bed. I've
Mm,
learned this about myself. Okay, before when I get ready to go to bed at night, I stretch for like 15 minutes,
mm,
and there's other things. I'll really massage my arms, and I found that when I'm practicing my horn, I've been getting tendonitis in my elbows,
mm.
and the more that I'm practicing, the more sore my elbows get. So I've been reading about it, and I've just been trying to really massage all the muscles that are engaged with my hands and fingers and forearms and just everything. So that and ibuprofen.
So, right, right. That the active ingredient.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So, I had my active ingredient earlier today. Okay, so,
Oh,
uh, so, so Brian, tell us about how you grew up and where you're from and what your childhood was like.
yeah.
Um, I think you can work your dad into that,
Yeah.
um,
Sure.
and um, and then also, what turned you on about music, and maybe some early mentors and
Yeah.
all of that.
Well, um, my mother was a musical theater performer, and she was living in New Orleans. My father was a saxophone player with Al Hurt for many years, and he played with Al Hurt and Pee Wee Russell, Roger Pergo, Ellis Marsalis, the late great Ellis Marsalis, who just passed away about a month ago or so. Um, but yeah, it's funny. I have some tapes of my father and Ellis on the road talking, and uh, I have those, and those very special. But uh, so I was born in New Orleans. Okay, my mom and father got married, and I was born in New Orleans, and I lived there for a couple of years, and um, then we they relocated to Mansfield, which is where my father was from originally. My mom is originally from Houston. My father is originally from Mansfield. So we all three went to Mansfield when I was a baby, and that's where I was raised. From 2 years old, I was in Mansfield, Ohio, and um, my father was still on the road with Al Hurt for a while, and my mother uh, w- still is a singer. She's still actively singing, and but she raised me along with my father through music. My mother would sing in Mansfield in various establishments. Singing jazz. My mother's influences are Ella Fitzgerald. And so she was singing uh, in various jazz formats in Mansfield. So they got divorced when I was a little boy, and my mother kept singing, and I always had music in the house. Always had music in the house. My mother was always listening to a lot of the great jazz vocalists, getting ready for her gigs, and so I can still remember so many things um, about that as a child, and just how all that influenced me. And my father passed away when I was 9. Okay, so that wasn't too much longer after we moved to Mansfield, and I knew that he played the saxophone, but I didn't know very much about him. And one day, I was probably 10. A very good friend of my father's, Pat Judy, who's in Wisconsin right now, gave me a tape of my father um, performing saxophone, and I still have that tape. It's a very special tape to me, and I just couldn't believe the sound I was hearing when I first heard that. It was such a beautiful sound that just connected with me. You know, yes, because it was my father, but just the sound of the saxophone. I'd never heard it before. I'd never heard the tenor saxophone really before. And what ended up happening was, I think a couple months later, after I got that tape, I got a permission slip from school uh, asking me to join the band, right? And I got home and I said, "Mom, you got to take me to Metronome Music. I want to be in the school band." And so she got me in the car and she said, "Okay, Brian, what do you want to play?" I said, "The drums." And she said, "No, you're not playing the drums. You're not going to play the drums. What do you want to play?" I said, "Okay." And that's when I chose the alto saxophone. And um, yeah, so that's where I officially started. That's how I officially started. You know.
Yeah, and so did you take some lessons and
Yeah.
who?
Well, my very first teacher was Mr. Kramer, Mr.
Mhm.
Larry Kramer, um, and he was from Mansfield. Honestly, I don't know if he's still with us or not. But so I played for about a year. Okay, that was the fifth grade. In the sixth grade, I was getting pretty decent, for a young kid. And it was suggested that I take some lessons with Percy Hall, the late great Percy Hall, who passed away about a year ago. He's kind of a legend in Mansfield as a great uh, musical teacher, a great band director at Mansfield Senior High School. He was there for many, many years. Anyways, I took some lessons off of him. A very wonderful person. Um, Taught me some fundamental skills that I needed to, get under my fingers, and just took a few lessons with him, and um, and that's about it really. I didn't really start getting serious about the saxophone, honestly, Sean, until I went to college. I mean, I was pretty good in high school. I was always interested in the saxophone, and people knew me in school because of the saxophone. But I didn't really, you know, cross that bridge, you know, until after I got to college. When I graduated high school, I actually stayed out of high school for 2 years. And I was working in a lumber mill, and uh, music really wasn't something that I was uh, thinking I was going to be doing.
I
Uh,
you
yeah,
know I think I mean I knew I was going to be doing music, but I didn't want to go to college.
right.
So I also I didn't go straight to college.
Yeah,
Um,
really.
yeah, so basically the way it worked, it was the first year I just stayed home and practiced like 8 hours a day or something.
Yeah. See, I,
Um,
I wasn't like that as a kid.
but but the next year I went to junior college, and I just took, my dad made a deal with me. He said, "Hey, I'll reimburse 100% of an A." And what did he say? And no, he said, I'll reimburse 100% of at least a B.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, maybe I should go to school then. So then I went to school, and then I transferred into to Western after that.
Yeah.
And then I was at Western for 4 years. So I was always like a year older than the kids
Yeah.
that were in my
Me too.
yeah,
Me
yeah.
too. Me too. I want to back up a little bit and
Sure.
say there were a couple of people that were very crucial in as far as influences are concerned.
Mm-hmm.
My high school band director, um, not Percy Hall. He was on the other side of town. I mean, of course, he was important, but another one band director was Mr. Eddie Cudioni.
Mm.
Um, Mr. Cudoni passed away probably 6 years ago, I think, but he was great. This little Italian guy that I just love so much, and um, he would he would stay with me after school on many days, and he would try his best with me. He knew I was really into improvising, and I wanted to learn, but he didn't really know how to teach me how to improvise. So what he would do, he would just get a lot of Lenny Niehaus books, right?
Right.
The jazz reading books that are great books. And he would just stay with me after school, and we would just read those books, for
Mm.
like 20, 30 minutes, a few days a week, and he'd drive me back home. But another individual I'd like to mention, Sam Romanoli. Sam Romanoli was my mother's piano player in Mansfield, Ohio,
Mm.
and Sam knew that I was getting into music, and he would just lay albums on me. Every now and then he would just give me like a David Sanborn album, or a Spyro Gyra album,
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah.
you know, and he would just nurture me, kind of from a distance. He would just kind of lay something on me, and I would just listen to the heck out of it. But those are very important phases, in my development. But it
It,
wasn't until after college when I really started getting serious.
um, so, uh, one thing that we have in common is that we both went to CCM.
Yeah,
Now,
that's right.
I more recently went,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, you
uh,
got your doctorate there. Yeah, yeah.
but uh, and you studied with Rick Van Meter.
Oh yes,
Can you talk a
Rick
little bit
Van
about
Meter.
that?
Oh boy, where shall I start? Um, Rick Van Meter, um, a master teacher, exactly what I needed. I didn't have the discipline and the focus that was necessary to be a good saxophone player. Um, and in working with Rick was essential because Rick is all about regimentation and discipline and focus, and I was just all over the place. I didn't know much about anything other than David Sanborn and Spyro Gyra. you know
Mm.
I went in to my audition for CCM. I think they let me in based on a Charlie Parker solo that I sight read, or maybe I memorized it. I think I memorized this "Now's the Time," the famous "Now's the Time" solo by Charlie Parker. um, I had just listened to that solo so much, and I had it memorized, and I played it for them at my audition, and and they accepted me. And again, I was about a year or two. I was 2 years older than everybody else.
Right.
Um, so I graduated in '88, and I went to school CCM in '90. Um, so they accepted me into the program. Now those first couple 2 to 3 years were very difficult for me. Like I say, because I was coming from a different place from most of the students that were already there. Many of the students were kind of accomplished already. Very good players, but they were very influential to me. And I just kept on my path and um, learned. And Rick was on me, man. He was on me every lesson, and I can't tell you enough about that guy. I mean, he really set me on the right path for me, to learn.
Now you were still playing alto through college, and
Alto.
you didn't switch to tenor until you completed college.
Correct.
And
Correct.
I remember us having a conversation about that, and something to the effect of you feel like the tenor really helped to stabilize you and
Yeah.
anchor, anchor you.
Yeah.
Um,
That's right.
can you talk a little bit about maybe your perceived difference between your alto playing and your tenor playing, and then maybe uh, I don't know, talk just a little bit about maybe
Yeah.
the characteristics of the different instrument, those different horns.
Yeah. Well, I started with the alto saxophone, and uh, so I was very at home with that instrument. Um, it wasn't until I got into college I realized that uh, you know I just overplayed a lot. and I rushed a lot. My time really wasn't happening. And Rick Van Mater suggested that I try a bigger instrument. He said it might slow me down. It might change some aspects of my playing for the better. And that being said, I always heard the tenor in my mind. Okay,
Right.
just because
And your dad was a tenor player.
because my father was a tenor player, and
Yeah.
again, a lot of the influences I had were tenor saxophone players.
Right.
But again, I was stubborn. I just wanted to stay with the alto saxophone. So I would have to say the biggest thing that I think of from my change from alto to tenor, again, would just be it just slowed my process down. And when I moved to the tenor, I felt like my internal voice, like something just shifted into place, and like there was more of an even flow,
Mm.
a more of an even connection from my mind to my fingers, and plus I enjoyed it more. Quite honestly, I enjoyed practicing more and playing more, because that was really what I that was just my you know my vision, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The sort of way that I think about the difference between alto and tenor is like alto's more like a sports car, and tenor's a little more like a truck, and
What's a baritone?
a semi,
It's
and um, and so it's interesting because some folks with the sports car, it's a little too light. The weight of the vehicle is too light for the power under the hood.
mm,
Um, and but then the same thing is true. Some people that are playing tenor, it's really too heavy.
yeah.
It's too much, and if they go back to alto, another thing I think it's interesting because um, one thing to note is that there are a lot more tenor players than there are alto players,
Yeah.
and but a lot of tenor players started on alto, right? Because
Yeah.
in or on clarinet, right? Clarinet, then alto,
Right.
then tenor. That
Right.
was the kind of the common thing. J.D. Allen
Yeah.
did that. John Coltrane, um,
Michael Brecker.
Doug, yep, Doug Lawrence.
Yeah.
He that was the same path for him,
Yeah.
and uh, Walt Weiskopf. He had the
Right.
same
Yeah.
the
Right.
same.
That's right. I
Yeah,
misheard that. Right.
yeah. So it's kind of an interesting kind of progression. But one
That's the
thing I
way to
think
do
that
it. That's the way to do it. I mean, that's what I tell my students.
mm,
If a parent comes to me and says, we want to start my son or daughter on a woodwind instrument, either clarinet or saxophone, what do you suggest? I usually always go with the clarinet first, but
mm. And it's interesting because with respect to alto and tenor, it makes sense that an adolescent may even identify more with the alto because it's likely to be closer to their speaking voice.
mm,
But as we get older and we go through maturity and puberty and all of that,
mhm.
um, and then also our lung capacity increases and muscle strength increases so that we can handle something that's heavier, right, and that requires more air. Um, and then it also tends to match more with what our speaking voice is,
Yeah,
um,
right.
which I think maybe creates less uh, sort of
It's
cognitive dissonance with
yeah,
the sound coming out of the horn versus how
yes,
we identify with sound in our head.
100%. Yeah,
So,
yeah. That's exactly right. My kids. Uh, does Moses ever want to play your saxophone when you're practicing or anything like that? Does he ever say,
yeah,
"Daddy, can I play?"
yeah, I
Well,
had the soprano out a couple weeks ago,
okay,
and he was, hey, I want to play that. Or anytime I get the MIDI wind controller out, it's like, oh, I want to put, I
okay,
want to do that, and but yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I thought about getting a little cheap curved soprano for my kids because they're always
Hmm.
wanting to play my instruments, but I always feel a little weird letting them play these professional instruments, but I still let them play them, of course. But I would feel more comfortable if I could just have like a very affordable instrument upstairs that they could play
Yeah,
on
yeah.
whenever they wanted to.
I have a 6-year-old. I,
You get
I
it.
kind of understand what you're talking about.
When they start grabbing it, Dad, what does this do? They grab at the rods, and I'm like, oh my god,
That horn costs more than you.
right,
Um,
right.
uh, um, so okay, so college, um, making a transition to tenor
Yeah.
after college. What did you do after college?
Well, um, so when I graduated college, I got a job on Princess Cruise Lines.
Oh yeah.
Actually, a couple other cruise lines, but I ended up going with Princess after I think it was RCCL Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. I think that's what it was, and a smaller cruise line that's not in existence anymore, Dolphin Cruise Line, and that's a funny story. They went under because, um, well, it's not real funny, but it's a little tragic. They were throwing garbage overseas, okay,
Oh
illegally
man.
in illegal territory, and they found out that it was from the ship. It washed on shore because of the captain's cocktail photos that were in these bags.
Oh.
And anyways, they that ship went under. Yeah, it was kind of a weird thing. But anyways, I worked on cruise ships
Look,
off and on for 2 years. Yeah,
I have to ask you about the cruise ship thing
yeah.
because I remember a story.
Uh oh.
Um,
Uh huh. I got all
so
kinds of stories about
yeah,
that stuff, man.
so Dr. James Bunty.
Oh. Yeah, right.
See,
Caps.
I remember stuff, man. Uh,
Caps.
that's right.
That was hilarious.
Okay, so just tell the story. By the way, for the listeners, go back to episode 1. And Dr. James Bunty is the first person that I interviewed.
Yeah,
If you want to reference, but
yeah.
go ahead and tell the story, man.
Well, I met James, well, Dr. Bunty now, as he's referred to at CCM. Um, he was getting his master's degree at CCM while I was getting my undergrad, and we both got work on Royal Caribbean cruise lines, and that's at a time when I was still, I mean, I was into music and moving forward and all that in that regard, but I still had one foot into bodybuilding, and I was really trying to still get a little big and doing all this. And I'd heard about this thing about these 100 rep sets, right?
I'm trying not
Yeah,
to just start laughing.
yeah.
Okay, keep going, man.
So I was doing these 100 rep sets, right? And the thing about 100 rep sets, Sean, as you know, is that you can only use a little amount of weight, very light weight, because you're not going to get past, I don't know, 50 or whatever it is. Anyways, we were doing calf raises, and I had suggested to James that we do this together because we were both trying to, you know, get fit and all this. And we're working out together. And I was telling him the benefits of all this. And I hadn't really done this before, as far as, working out with the calves. And I did this, and it was honestly the most excruciating feeling I had. I mean, at a deep, deep place. And this is like just completing the set. I mean, forget about the days to come, the weeks to come. I mean, I mean, you literally feel it. Sometimes I wonder if that like affected my bones somehow. But anyways, James decided to do it with me, and I, you know, I had worked my calves out quite a bit, and my body was somewhat conditioned to exercising. And here I'm throwing James into this, and I don't think he's really worked out very much at this point. And he did these 100 rep calves set, and he literally he couldn't get out of his bed, man. I mean, he literally couldn't move. He couldn't go to the gig hardly. I mean, it was really something.
I'm sorry.
I don't
I'm
suggest
sorry,
that
James.
anybody for that. I don't
I'm
suggest everybody
sorry,
do that.
James. I'm sorry, James, but I couldn't help myself. Uh,
It made us stronger people, that's for sure.
that's right.
We learned never do that again.
Uh, all right,
You gotta
so
be crazy to do that, man. It's crazy.
so cruise ships.
Yeah, cruise ships, and I saved up, whatever it was, a few $1,000s, and I finally bought a tenor saxophone
Hmm.
when I got off that contract, and I was able to buy my first Selmer Mark Six saxophone from Tenor Madness, Randy Jones out in Iowa, and in fact, that's where I've gotten most of my saxophones. Uh, well, two of them, two my previous two Selmers that I had purchased. Excuse me, and yeah, and that's when I started getting serious about the saxophone. Was when I got off the cruise ship. That's when I started thinking, I really want to do this. I really feel connected with this instrument. Um, I that's kind of how I identify myself. I mean, most musicians identify themselves with their instruments. With
Hmm.
their musicality in whatever way that is, and that's kind of how I was learning to identify myself. You know, and part of that is just growing up. Maturity, but I was also investing a lot of time in the instrument. I wanted to get good. I wanted to be, uh, I just, I, I equated, and I still do to some degree. I equate practicing and getting better as being a better person. I don't know if that's really healthy or not, but that's kind of where I'm at. I always feel better about myself when I hit that horn hard in a focused way, in a
Hmm.
very disciplined and focused way. Um, and I can gauge when I have had really good practice sessions when I feel very peaceful and calm when I'm done. I mean, even if I'm working on something really difficult and trying to execute it fast or whatever I'm trying to do, I know it was a good practice session, an hour, 30 minutes, or whatever it is, when I feel real focused and calm. I know that a few days later, I'm going to get the benefits from that. I'm going to get the fruits from that labor.
Yeah.
Um,
You always sound great. I've never heard you when you didn't sound great, and
well,
um,
sometimes I've sounded better than others. Having kids, it's been a sacrifice, but I'm getting my footing as to how I can manage both things. You know.
yeah, I mean, I think, and we all go through that kind of ebb and flow. Life happens, and you got to make adjustments, and you get older, and your time is more under demand. And frankly, if you're a successful musician, if your career is moving uh, in the direction that you'd like it to, then theoretically you'd have less time to practice.
Yeah.
The longer you're doing it,
Right.
so becoming more efficient, practicing, and all that kind of stuff is important.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I was saying, you always sound great. I've been very much influenced and inspired by you. Every time I hear you play,
Well,
you
likewise, Sean. Always by you, man. You're amazing.
thank you.
Thank you.
But you have an unusual control in your altissimo range and a real clarity of pitch and sound, even pitch and sound all the way up there, and in a very uh, extensive extensively developed altissimo range,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that's always been inspiring about your playing and just in your sound. It doesn't matter what horn you're playing. It doesn't matter what the mouthpiece is. It's just this huge sound comes out of the horn, and you have a real you're real focused on what that sound is. I mean, it's like I mean, it's like a laser beam. It's like you're really aiming for a specific target, and you're very successful, it seems to me, at hitting that sound.
Yeah. Kind of going back to what we were saying, Sean, about the support and all that.
Yeah.
If you're providing the support, um, and you're pushing through the instrument in the correct manner, your air and your airstream will bypass any kind of inefficiencies in the mouthpiece,
Mm.
or reed,
Right.
or whatever's going on with the horn. If
Right.
you put it in the right way, you know, it'll just bypass any faults. I mean, yeah, it's better to have a good setup, obviously, you
Yeah.
know,
Right. Right. Right.
but
Anything that you can do to make it easier
easier, right?
and more consistent, then
Right,
yeah, it makes sense to do.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Um, you know, I always talk to my students about the five, components or aspects of a saxophone sound, or uh, um, the components, the factors, the
Attributes.
equipment,
Yeah. Oh,
used, the process of creating sound, the five things that are involved, and I always express them in the reverse order of significance. So, number five uh, is it's the saxophone. It's from the neck down, not including the neck. It's
right,
from the neck down. So what's
right.
important there is obviously you want a good seal. You want the saxophone to be internally as in tune with itself as possible, so the holes are sort of in the right places, so to speak. Good key work, stuff like that. Um, Number four is the neck, and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
neck is exponentially more involved in tone production than the body of the horn
yeah,
is.
yeah,
Um, Same kind of thing. Sometime a material can make a difference in the neck, but the main factor is the taper and the bore size of the neck. The third thing is the setup. And now we could get real specific with this, but basically the setup is the reed, the mouthpiece, and the ligature.
right, right.
Okay? Now that's exponentially more involved in tone production than the neck, which is exponentially more involved in the body of the instrument.
Right, right.
Um, Number two is your anatomy,
Hmm.
your lung capacity, diaphragmatic strength, tongue shape,
Yeah,
teeth shape, vowel sounds used, A, E, I, O, U, um, um, vocal cords, how that impacts the sound. I think muscular development, especially across this part of the body.
hmm,
I think all of that stuff has an effect
yeah,
on the sound. And then
yeah,
number one is the gray matter between your ears. So everything can be overcome. All of those other things can be overcome by purity of sound. The idea of what you want your sound to
yeah,
be,
yeah,
and you can press that sound through, you know,
yeah,
within reason, through
right,
pretty garbage equipment.
yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. And it's also interesting that you could have somebody play on a setup and have somebody else playing the same setup, and they're going to have two totally different sounds.
That's right. That's right.
And I agree with everything you were saying. And there's also the component of how the sound uh, resonates in your cranial
Oh,
passageway.
right, right. Your skull, right?
Your skull, and
Yeah.
uh, everything, everything.
Oh, yeah.
And it always amazes me, whenever I have like beginners, beginning students play that have really nice sounds. I'm sure you've had something like that, right? You've had a beginner
Mm-hmm.
student maybe, um, and you explain how to make a sound, And with some students, it just never happens. With other students, it's just amazing how they can come up with a really nice saxophone sound, even if they haven't had much of a reference of what a saxophone sounds like.
Yeah,
So that all has to do with what's going on up here.
it is interesting. I was talking to Dr. Ted McDaniel,
Yeah,
who's
yeah.
my predecessor at Ohio State
I see him a lot
director.
around Bexley. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, it's and something that you and he share in common is that you were both in my wedding.
Yeah, yeah, man.
You were both in my wedding.
Wonderful time. That was a
Yeah,
wonderful,
yeah.
beautiful time, man. I'll
So,
never forget that.
uh, but I was talking to him, and he was talking about one of his kids, um, when he, so Dr. McDaniel played saxophone, but he also played clarinet, um, and uh, and so he put his clarinet together for his son, one of his sons, to to play, and he showed him how to do the embouchure, and then he okay now play it, and he said the first note that he played was like beautiful, rich,
Yeah,
pure,
isn't that
sound,
something?
and it's sometimes that happens. That ain't usually what happens,
Yeah,
but
right.
sometimes, but sometimes it happens, and uh,
Yeah, it's a great thing. It makes being a teacher, you could, it just saves several weeks. Yeah, it saves time.
now consequently, it's well, not consequently. Um, his son is not a musician,
Okay.
but it's
It wasn't, the sound was good, but not that good.
well, it was a great sound, but it was like, I can do that already, so I'm going to do
Right,
something else. No,
right.
anyhow, so uh,
Too easy.
so I wanted to ask you a little bit about. I mean,
Yeah,
we've been talking, and actually, there's been this thread that's been happening through the
yeah.
entire conversation, about teaching.
Uh-huh.
Well, it's implied, a lot of the things that we've been talking about,
Yeah,
and that's one thing, about you is you're a great teacher, and I have been the beneficiary of your great teaching because I have inherited a number of your students
yeah,
at Ohio State,
yeah,
which are always very prepared.
yeah.
One of your students in particular, Wes Perry,
Oh, yeah,
um,
yeah,
and but a number of your students have found their way in my studio,
yeah,
and and I've always been so impressed with your teaching that when I took a sabbatical a couple years ago to complete the coursework for my doctorate, I asked you to come in and do
yeah.
and
That was a great
teach my students
experience.
that semester.
I was very, very grateful, for that opportunity. It was a fun opportunity. I really enjoyed that. You know.
Well, you're a bad dude, so I had to get the baddest dude. Um, I can't just have anybody teach my students. Um, so, but can you talk a little bit about teaching, and do you feel like your teaching affects your playing?
Well, that's a good question. Um, you know, I I would have to say yes. Um, the span of my students. I mean, I have some beginners and I also teach some professionals. Um, as far as teaching some of the beginners go, it's taught me patience. I love teaching beginners. I really get a kick out of teaching, uh, showing the magic of music to a young person. Um, when they first open that case and they see this piece of metal in there that has all kinds of opportunity, and I enjoy showing them, what potential that it has, and walking them through that process, you know, and it puts me in that place when I was their age to some degree. Um, And so there's that aspect of it. It's taught me patience. So I mean, it's wonderful, but I mean, honestly, I got to be very patient with some of the younger kids that don't want to be there. Um, but there are, other attributes as far as teaching some of the more experienced people. Um, it keeps me on my toes as far as making sure that they're getting proper information and that they're getting information that truly is valuable to them as a musician. Um, and I'm specifically talking about jazz. I mean, I do have some classical students, but um, mostly I'm teaching jazz to some of these more experienced musicians, and um, yeah, so that's just one thing that I really get a lot out of, and that's just making sure that they're getting the right amount of information, but also I make sure that it actually comes back to the music.
Mm.
Sean, that's the one thing that I feel can be missed. It can be easily put on the back burner. There's so much education. There's so many resources for uh, you know different educational resources, different books and YouTube videos and all kinds of different things. And it's so easy to go all in on all that stuff. And meanwhile, you've got uh, the heart of the whole thing over here to the side. It's
Yeah,
very
yeah.
it's very important that the music is first, and I try to always do that with my teaching. I'll frequently just sit there with the student and just listen to music, and we'll talk about what we're hearing. We'll talk about maybe the harmony of the piece that we're listening to. We'll learn the song. We talk about learning some kind of pattern, be it some kind of planing pattern or major pattern, a 2-5-1 or whatever it might be. And I'll talk to them about how to extract those things from the music, and we'll talk about how to navigate that through how to plug it into tunes. And so these are things that keep me on my toes. They keep me learning, and honestly makes me a better musician. I try not to keep it all the same either. I try to mix it up just to keep it interesting for myself. But
Yeah, which is a very important
yes, that
point. Yeah. Um,
because it can get a little I don't want to say boring, but a little mundane if you do the same thing. If you do the same thing with every student, you end up locking yourself into this thing, and you don't end up growing as a person. You know, sorry, as a musician. So I try to make it interesting. You know, as far as that goes.
yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about how it's possible to sort of leave important things still on the table, not really address,
Yeah,
um, music.
yeah.
And
The whole reason, isn't that funny?
yeah, I'll tell you, something that is, that whole, that question, do you know it or do you Google know it?
Yeah, right.
And I got into the game. I got into music because I wanted to play tunes, right?
Yes,
That's why I got into the game. I didn't get into the game to practice scales and stuff. Now,
right.
I practice scales a lot. I practice
That's a part of
rudiments,
it. Yeah,
fundamentals,
that's a part of it.
concepts, and different things, and improvisation
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah, I mean, I work on all that stuff, but
yeah.
really, it's about playing tunes.
It's about the music. That's right.
You know.
It's about the music, the feeling, and connecting with it. And that's a whole other thing. Um, you know, I think in your interview with Walt Weiskopf, he was saying something about you know, leave their performance out of the practice room,
Oh yeah, yeah. So
something
the so
something to that effect.
yeah, so the regular thing that and I say this to my students all the time: never perform in the practice room.
Right, right.
And Now, he added a sort of a nuance to that, which was, yeah, you do need time in the practice room to actually perfect something and to perfect it for presentation, which means that you need to be able to play it several times in a row, perfected,
Right.
unless you don't care what happens when you get in, on the bandstand, so to
Right.
speak.
Right.
So, so there should be a time in the practice room where you're actually finishing off a product
Yeah.
ready for presentation.
Right.
But most of the time in the practice room really should be sounding terrible. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Well, that's what Sonny Rollins says. That's what Charlie Parker said. In some of his interviews.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, um, you get it. You and Clark Terry even says something. Clark Terry has some kind of saying that he said. I wish I could say it right now, but there's like three or four words that he's like something like assimilate, imitate, and then that's not regurgitate, but it's something like
Mhm.
that.
Right, right, right.
But you know, in the practice room, you're there to learn things. You're there to learn, like you said, concepts and and just to get your game happening, right? To get your vocabulary happening, to listen, to work out things, to pick up pieces from the music, and to imitate these things. And then when you're on the bandstand, you forget about it. It should be, and it should be a very comfortable feeling when you're on the bandstand. There have been times I've felt uncomfortable, and there have been times I've felt comfortable. So I know what the right feeling is. I'm sure you do too. You know what the right feeling is when you're feeling you're feeling connected. You know that whatever's about to happen, it's going to be okay because you are connected with your horn and connected with your ideas. Whatever's happening here is going to come straight through your fingers, and you're going to feel
Yeah.
very good. So, anyways, yeah, the practice room is to work on things, and then you go out to the world.
And
But
and where and so you have students. Are you teaching them all privately through your own studio, or are you teaching through
yeah,
another studio, or?
well, I have a studio. I work at a music store in Hilliard. Okay, but I also have many students that I teach privately at my home.
Right.
Of course, right now the whole thing is different. Of course, with the social distancing, everything is online,
Yeah.
and that took a little while to get used to, of course. But I feel like we're making some headway now, and I'm feeling more comfortable with that whole process. How are you feeling about that? I'm sure. Are you teaching online now?
Well, thankfully the semester is over.
Okay.
It ended the end of last week,
Yeah.
um, and I mean I love teaching, and there's a rhythm, and
Yeah. Right.
um, after a school year, you get to a certain point. It's good to have some time off to sort of reevaluate some things. But obviously, in the case of this past semester, um, the last 5 weeks or whatever were, you know, the with the social distancing and everything, and it's really challenging. And I don't know that at these universities and
Mm.
in high schools and other places where ensembles and
Yeah.
private lessons and all that kind of stuff are being taught, I don't think people understand the dramatic effect of something like this. And it's wonderful that we have the technology to be able to do what we can do, but I've been saying this uh, in these interviews. Matter matters. Physical proximity to people matters.
Yes. Oh
You
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
the way that the sound wave hits your body and resonates it matters. Not just a um, it's not just about the sound. It's about the proximity of the sound. It's not just about being able to play the right notes and the right timing or something. It's about the sort of communal, um, you know, being in the same space as the sound.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a different kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, don't get me wrong. I'm glad that we have the technology to be able to do what we were able to do, and I'm very happy that uh, that Ohio State, who's kind of led the way and kind of making sure everybody's safe and trying to make certain precautions and everything. Um, Hindsight is 2020, and I don't know that anybody got this thing perfect,
Right.
but I think that in the future, I think we'll know more about how these kinds of things actually are affecting folks. People in the arts, we're a different kind of thing
Hmm.
than like a math class,
Well,
or you
right.
know,
Right. And
in
especially improvised music, you
right.
know.
Mhm.
Um, I don't want to say you could get away with certain ensembles by doing it like this because, you know, like you said, uh, there's nothing will ever take the place of being in a room of musicians and performing music all together as a true present ensemble. But
And for an audience.
and foreign well and foreign audience, there's that symbiotic relationship, you know. Oh,
Oh, how I
audience.
miss it, man. Oh, how I miss it. Oh, how I miss
You
it. And,
know, you just got to stay positive, man. You got to stay positive, and how I see it is, I'm just going to try to keep getting to a higher place. You know, as I'm
yeah.
sure you are too, man. Um,
Yeah, I mean it's been said uh, lots of different ways. I've heard folks talk about this. Um, when this thing is over, because all the musicians are practicing and stuff now, we're going to hear some of the greatest music ever.
yeah, right. Oh, we'll see.
After this, and
There's a whole problem of playing with musicians, though, that we're all missing.
yeah, it's true. I kind of take the general sentiment. Um, I want to think that, and I want to hope that people really take this as the opportunity that it is.
Right.
Um, Something in the realistic part of me, which is most of me, um, makes me wonder if that actually, is going to be the case.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Um, I did want to ask you about um, future goals and maybe projects that you're working on.
Hmm.
Um, and we've been talking about Bryan the musician for the most part. We mentioned Bryan as the father, Bryan as the husband.
Yeah.
Um, but how has this? I mean, have there been some opportunities, um, possibly for you to maybe address some things about Bryan the person, as far as personal growth? Maybe some
Oh,
things
yeah.
that you know maybe you have some more time to meditate or whatever. Or those, or is let me let,
Yeah. As
I'm
far
interested in that.
as this situation is that we're in now, uh, or
Well, yeah, I mean, in particular, because I think of what's happening right now. But
no,
I
yeah.
mean, but several things for me. That what's happening for me right now started before the quarantine.
Mm,
And it's just sort of kind of opened it up and
yeah.
given me a little bit more
Right.
time to be able to address certain things.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, it could be stuff that, you know,
Yeah. Well, I think honestly, I feel as if the time that I have to practice now, it's more it's more of a refined kind of experience for me.
Mm.
It's more distilled, perhaps,
Yeah.
um, because I don't want to say like I, I feel like I'm running on, shorter time now that I'm just a little older, but you know, I'm with my kids all the time, raising my kids with my
Right.
wife, and I have a lot of responsibilities, with teaching and and playing. I feel like I'm playing quite a bit whenever this thing isn't around. But whenever I do have the time to focus on my craft, uh, there's less sort of dilly dally time. You know what I mean? I mean, I get
Mm.
down here and I feel like I have certain things that I want to execute and work on. I'm always working on patterns in my phone. If I think of a pattern, I'll tape it in my phone and sort of record it in my phone. I'll come down and I'll try to work that stuff out. So to answer your question, uh, having a family uh, has sort of given me more perspective on the value of the alone time that I get with music.
Mm.
Because I know that it's going to be short lived. If I'm down here for an hour, I'm gonna pretty soon I'm gonna get like a daddy. You know, Isaac won't let me play whatever. So I try to make the best of it. I try to make the best of it in all circumstances. I try to be positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. So how about projects? You're a composer.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
You
always
doing
writing,
some
man.
writing? Yeah.
Yeah. So I just finished this CD here. That was probably this last July, and you know, I I feel like after this last CD, I really was more inspired to continue writing. So I'm still writing. You know, I'm always writing at the piano and writing ideas down. And um, I just recently got a DAW, a digital audio workstation,
Yeah.
and I've been putting some ideas into that recently and
Which,
having
which
a lot
one
of
do
fun
you?
with that.
Which one is it?
I got a Studio One.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did have Pro Tools before, but I like Studio One a little better, I think.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm always writing ideas and working some things out, and you
Do
know,
you feel like you get writer's block at all when? So let me tell you what happens to me.
yeah,
So if I have a lot of songs or compositions, a lot of stuff that I've already written,
mm,
if I haven't recorded it yet, I get writer's block.
oh,
So it's like once I record that stuff, then I'll be like, oh, okay, here's some more ideas. Let's get these these ideas
wow,
down.
it's
Do you
kind of
ever
like it's kind of like an hourglass effect. All
or
these
something?
ideas are starting to pile up top.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah,
or is it more or do you feel like it's just kind of just a steady flow, not necessarily
well, it
project
depends.
oriented
Yeah, it
or
depends.
initiated?
Usually I'll just sit down at the piano and work things out and sing through melodies as I'm playing the harmony on the piano, and I'll just do this for a while. And um, I try not to feel pressured. Although saying that, there are times when I feel a little pressured, and I do get writer's block if I'm doing a gig and I want to write a couple tunes for the gig,
Mm.
and the gig is maybe, I don't know, a few days away and I haven't written anything yet.
Mm.
That extra feeling of I don't know, anxiety about writing the tune might get in the way. But like now, during all this, I can just come down and I just let things go. And and especially using this little DAW here, it's a lot of fun. I get all these different MIDI sounds, and I've got my EWI that I've been working with as well. And it's just a lot of fun. I've got these really cool drum loops from
Mm.
Eric Harland.
Oh yeah, yeah.
that are really cool, man. It's just like
I think I have
hundreds.
that same collection.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, so Brian, is there
Yeah.
anything else that you'd like to mention, or something that you want
Uh,
the audience to know?
just through all of this that we're going through, we're all in this together. Stay positive. Uh, get involved in something that you might not have otherwise gotten involved in. Uh, learn a new craft, learn something. And I'm saying this because I know that it's easy to get a little overwhelmed, you know, by just the latency or the staying at home and just the same thing every day. Um, but just try to get yourself involved. I feel like for us, Sean, um, it's it's an advantage that we have music.
Oh,
Okay,
definite
and
advantage. Oh yeah.
I feel like being here in my basement, it's like it's my retreat, it's my safe zone. There's so much for me to do here, and
Well, wasn't nobody going to be in my basement anyway, but me. So.
well, judging by all that stuff, man, I don't think anybody would fit down there. Look at all that stuff. Wow.
Yeah,
But
it's a
yeah.
it's a problem. I'm working on it.
But yeah, man, you know, my whole thing is just always trying to get better, always trying to improve at what I feel like I'm about, and and that's one of the gifts that for me, music has given me is the opportunity to improve, and I couldn't imagine not having something that I could improve on, you know.
Yeah.
So whatever some individual out there might be interested in doing, do that thing, and work on it and keep moving up. It's important.
It really is. Um, and one thing about music too is that uh, it's such a diverse. It's such a
Yeah,
there's so much things to do. It's such a
yeah.
varied. I mean,
So many. It's endless. Yeah.
yeah. There's all kinds of stuff, and even if it's just as simple as pick up another instrument, or
Right. I saw you with a trumpet last week. What was that about?
yeah,
Oh boy.
yeah. I
Oh
mean,
God. Here we go.
I got my trumpet. Yeah, well, mostly it's just sitting right next to me to remind me
To pick it up.
to pick it up and get
Wow.
my lips buzzing and
Oh boy.
play a little bit. Um, Trying to do a little bit of that each day before, you know,
Yeah.
because it's
Of
real physical
course.
thing. But I might have told this story in another video, but Dwight Adams, this was his horn.
Oh wow.
This is a French Besson, and he played this horn for a lot of years. I got it from him. We traded. I gave him a saxophone, and he gave me
Oh
this.
wow.
And part of the reason, or a lot of the reason, um, was in case one of his kids decided they want to play saxophone, he wanted to be able to play saxophone so that he could get them started, and then me the same thing with trumpet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my son, you can see it over there. There's a P trumpet over there.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh yeah. The blue
yeah,
pea
yeah, yeah. It's a
trumpet.
blue
Yeah. Yeah.
P trumpet, and so Moses and I will every once in a while. He's not doing anything consistently,
Yeah. Well.
um, but every once in a while he'll let's play the trumpet. So
Sure.
we'll go upstairs and
Yeah.
sit in the family room and play a few notes, or he'll come
Right.
down here.
Right.
So um, so that's my as long as I can be in front of him, it's good enough.
That's right. Yeah. As long as you can teach him a few things,
Yeah, yeah,
that's excellent.
yeah.
That's great, man.
All right, man. Well, God bless you and your family, and pray that you all stay safe. You know, I pray for our community and our world. I pray that we get through this thing uh, sooner than later,
Yes, right.
and
That's right.
and safely. You know.
That's right. Sean, you're a wonderful person, man, and you're a great influence on me, and as well as a lot of other people, man. And you're it's always amazing to see all the different things that you do and you excel at. So thanks for being you. You know, you're quite an inspiration to me. That's for sure.
Uh, Thanks, man.
Yeah,
Likewise, man.
of course,
Likewise.
of course.
All right. You
All
have a
right,
good one, man.
all right. You too, man. All right, take care, Sean. Bye, everybody. Bye, bye.
All right. See ya.